Christmas is filled with traditions. Some we make ourselves, some have been passed down through generations, and some we practice, but have no idea why. One of these events, traditions, is the celebration of Yuletide and all the things that come with it. But questions arise. What is Yuletide? Where does it come from? And what on earth is a Yule? To answer these questions, we must first travel back over 1,000 years to Northern Europe, in the time of myths and legends, in the era of pagan Vikings, more specifically, the Scandinavian region. Sometime 1,500 years ago, tribes in Scandinavia started celebrating and having festivals in alignment with the winter solstice. For those who don't know what the winter solstice is, well, it's when the Earth is the farthest from the sun, which means after the winter solstice, the Earth will start getting closer to the sun and warmer days are on the way. So if you live in the cold climates, like Scandinavia or Northern Europe, you're going to be pretty excited that sun's coming back and you aren't going to be cold all the time. So it's a fair reason to celebrate, and so thought the other tribes in the region. The celebration of winter solstice, though practiced in many different ways, started to adopt and spread from Scandinavia and in their way of celebrating. And as time progressed, so too did religions and civilization. The era of the Vikings would come to flourish, not only keeping the celebration of the winter solstice alive, expanding on it. Not only keep the celebration of the winter solstice alive, but expanding on it, and expanding the regions that celebrate the winter solstice. As Vikings explored, raided, and migrated, so too did their practices. The celebration became a festival, one with rules, and one many look forward to every year. The Winter Solstice Festival quickly gained the name Yule, as more people celebrated and it became a staple in their way of life. So too did the stories and traditions that came along with it. Yule quickly, or may have started to be tied in with the Norse god Odin. Odin is also called Yulnir, so most historians agree that Yule has to do with Odin, Thor, and Freya, which I would say is a safe bet, but there are other hypotheses as well. Now, you may be asking, what does Yule have to do with Yule? Well, get in there. Be patient. Well, as the Vikings were celebrating their holiday, which some have wild traditions, which I'll go into in a minute, the Vikings kept expanding outward to new countries, to new people. Some would be Germanic tribes, some would be the Celts, some would be Anglo-Saxons. Well, a similarity in all those different cultures is that they speak different languages, and trying to pronounce words in different languages is hard and easy to mess up. I know from personal experience. So many people, mainly Anglo-Saxon and pagan Britons, started to celebrate Yule, but call it through their native tongue, which would become Jol, G-E-O-L. Well, add a few centuries, different accents and different languages. Yule would morph into Jol, which would morph into Yule. But how Yule and Yule are celebrated are surprisingly so similar, yet so different. And boy, that was a tongue twister. When it came to the celebrations, the festivals, for the most part, all of them would last 12 days in celebration of the winter solstice. But in Viking cultures, winter solstice was a time of heightened supernatural activity, when darkness around every corner makes sense. The sun isn't out, the world is quite literally more dark. And also, in their mythology, undead creatures called Draugr would wander the earth during this period. And Odin himself would do a wild hunt. Because of the magic around them and the darkness, the people would light bonfires to ward off the darkness and to celebrate the beginning, the return of the sun. People would burn bonfires, piles, trees, eventually logs, in the town square and in their homes. You see, the classic Yule log is coming from somewhere, but more on that in a minute. People who celebrated Yule, less so Yule, would dress up as goats and make goat ornaments. Those ornaments are still made today, especially in Sweden. The symbolism for the goats is actually pretty straightforward, which is wonderful when researching cultures and history. Odin and Thor had chariots, which were pulled by magical goats. Sounding a bit close to modern Christmas, an old guy in December being pulled by magical animals through the sky. Oh yeah, I can see where this is going. Some people even believed in an invisible spirit goat that comes around during the winter solstice. And some tribes had connections with the god Devek, who was the god of the fertile sun, which was represented by a white goat. So needless to say, goats were quite common during this festival. And besides making goat ornaments and dressing up as goats, people would sacrifice goats. Oh yeah, sacrifice in different ways was basically a standard for many centuries. People would sacrifice goats, boars, which was for Freya in an event usually called Sanagultra, but since it's coincide with Yule, they tied it into it. People sacrificed meat and wine, and rumors, though not confirmed, there is a possibility that there were human sacrifices as well. Then came along Christianity, which spread extremely fast throughout the world, a large part by the Romans and the monks that would venture outward. You see, early monks that would go around spreading the word of Christ were quite clever in their methods of convincing people. They would find similarities between the faiths and build upon that. One such monk would be Bede, who wrote about Yule in 1725 AD. An extremely well-traveled man, especially if you consider the time period, he would write how Vikings, Germanic tribes, Britons all celebrated this holiday, a 12-day celebration of cheer, merry during the winter solstice. And Bede, along with other monks, all saw the symbolism of the light keeping away the dark, and built upon it. The bonfires to keep the undead creatures away and help Odin in his hunt got changed into candles to symbolize the light Jesus brought into the earth years later. And once the Pope moved Jesus' birthday, which happens to coincide with all the people who celebrated the winter solstice, more people got on board with changing the faith. Eventually, Yule, more specifically turned into Yule, or yuletide, that word started to show up in history. It got first written about in 1475. So sometime during 1725 to 1475, Yule went to Joel, Joel went to Yule, the word that we all know today. Well, sort of know today, which still is celebrated in a sort of fashion. But backtracking a little bit, a king of Norway by the name of Hakon the Good would come around. Now Hakon was born with Norse faith, but at an early age was sent to England, and there he learned Christianity. When Hakon returned back, he started to and attempted to convert everyone to Christianity in his kingdom. All of this is happening in the 10th century, and surprisingly, went better than you would expect. Usually, when I read about a ruler changing the local populace's faith, it's usually met with a lot of resistance. But for Hakon, he was able to convert, or start the conversion, I should say, of his people over to Christianity. I would wager, because Christianity and the Norse faith in this region had a lot in common, Yule was an easy sell to turn into Yule. And Yule turned into a celebration of the birth of Jesus, not the winter solstice. Yuletide turned into Christmas time. And for the traditions, well, those stuck around from the original Yule, but morphed throughout the years. The bonfires, to keep the undead creatures away, turned into burning big logs that were supposed to feed the fire for a 12-day celebration, a yulelog, which many of you listening may recognize today in a different form. Over time, that yulelog that physical log you were burning in your fireplace turned into a cake that looked like a log that you eat during the holidays. Odin and Thor, riding in chariots pulled by magical goats, got changed into St. Nicholas or Santa Claus in a sled. Though, funny enough, some depictions of Santa Claus all the way up to the 20th century had Santa's sleigh being pulled by goats instead of the modern reindeer we all think about. Some depictions even have Santa riding on a single goat. Things like mistletoe and wreath hanging, which more than likely came from the Celts or the Druids that celebrated Yule in their own mythology, became staples in the Yuletide and Christmas. You know Christmas carolers? Well, there's a good chance they came from Yule/Yule too. Northern paganers had a thing called wassailing, which was basically their form of Christmas caroling, but their sounds way more fun because drinking is involved, and I imagine the songs they sang were probably pretty metal. And if I had to suspect, though I have no evidence of this, the holiday song, 12 Days of Christmas, I imagine that 12 isn't by accident, and stems somewhere in the beginnings of Yule and the birth of Yule. Christmas trees, decorations for the holidays also most likely got there, if not their beginning, due to pagans celebrating Yule. Fun fact, there's a chance the word jolly stems from Yule, which was changed by Joel when the Anglo-Saxons changed the word. Yeah, this is a fun one to say between Joel, Yule, and Yule. But as time went on, any celebration festivals not related to Jesus in Europe were stomped out. So Yule, though heavily influenced / is part of Christmas, gave way fully to Christmas in the more modern sense, as many see today. It was only until recently, when state-enforced Christianity was removed, that Yule and Yuletide started to make a comeback in the more traditional sense. In the 21st century, neo-paganism has been on the rise. Paganism in the modern era, Wiccans and Norse revivalists, and I imagine reenactors as well, have been bringing Yule back, and Yule back, and doing it in the more traditional sense, minus the human and animal sacrifices. So the word Yuletide in modern times basically means Christmas time. Yule kind of means winter solstice / Jesus celebration, but it all stems from Yule, a Norse holiday and celebration that the sun is beginning to shine brighter. Spring will soon come, and a reason to spend time and be jolly with ones around us. Doesn't sound too different from what many celebrate today. And though many of the traditions in Norse Yule are gone, many of them still live on over 1,000 years later through Yule. So this holiday season, take a look around you, be thankful for what you have and the people you have in your life. Be curious on why things are traditions and why things are the way they are. And also, if researching Yule/Yule has taught me anything, is that no matter how many miles apart or how many centuries, us humans, we're all pretty similar. And with that being said, thank you all for listening, and happy holidays.